The streets of Manhattan buzzed with life as Ivanka Trump emerged from the luxurious entrance of the Grand Hotel. The scent of city grit mixed with the aroma of food carts and coffee shops. Pedestrians hurried past her, absorbed in their own worlds, while her team of bodyguards kept a watchful eye. Suddenly, a man stepped forward from the crowd. A figure hunched with worn clothes, his face weathered and lined with the weight of hardship. "Just $1, he said softly, extending a small, empty cup toward her. His voice was steady, but his gaze was intense, searching for something more than just spare change. Ivanka paused for a moment, caught off guard. She glanced down at the frail man, her expression a mix of sympathy and confusion. In that brief silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her guards shifted slightly, moving protectively, but Ivanka raised a hand to stop them. There was no threat here, only a man asking for help in the only way he knew how. The hum of the city continued around them. Sirens, honking horns, and chatter. But for Ivanka, everything felt subdued. Her mind raced through thoughts of how quickly she could offer assistance. And yet, part of her wondered what impact $1 would truly make. The man's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "Just $1, he repeated, as if that single coin could bridge the distance between their vastly different worlds. Ivanka took a deep breath, her heart beating faster as she realized that this moment wasn't about money. It was about something more profound, a connection. Ivanka's mind swirled with thoughts as she stood frozen for a moment. Her initial instinct was to dismiss the man's request, to step back into her comfortable world where problems were measured in business deals and charity foundations. Yet, something about his quiet desperation tugged at her. Something deeper, something real. "You don't have to do this," her bodyguard whispered beside her, his voice low and firm. "Let's move along." But Ivanka held up a hand again, her gaze still fixed on the man in front of her. The city seemed to close in around them, the noise fading into a distant hum. "You seem lost," Ivanka finally said, her voice softer than she intended. "Why just $1? Her words hung in the air, weighted with curiosity and sympathy. The man's expression shifted. Hope flickered in his tired eyes, briefly illuminating the sadness that lived behind them. "I don't want your pity," he said, his voice steady yet frail. "I just want to remind people that I'm still here." His words resonated deeply, shaking Ivanka in a way she hadn't expected. The crowd around them continued to move, but they paused, caught in the moment of vulnerability unfolding before them. The tension was palpable. Ivanka glanced around at the people who had stopped briefly to watch the interaction. Some were judgmental, others sympathetic, and a few looked downright indifferent. The divide was clear, but the weight of it settled on Ivanka like a heavy cloud. Her heart ached as she realized how easily society ignored those left behind, the forgotten ones standing on the fringes of normal life. "I'm not just a billionaire," she thought. "I'm someone who has a voice, a responsibility." And in that moment, the conflict deepened. A battle between empathy and the harsh realities of being a public figure in a world driven by appearances. Ivanka's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Part of her wanted to solve the man's immediate problem, to hand him a few dollars and move on. Yet, another part of her grappled with the deeper question. What truly matters in moments like this? She had seen countless cases of homelessness, charity drives, and aid programs, but none of them felt real in the way this moment did. She thought back to a recent event where she had been praised for donating millions to a shelter. Yet here was a man standing in front of her with no desire for money alone. His need was not for financial relief, but for acknowledgement, for a connection that went beyond numbers. "I've given before," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it never feels enough." Her words hung in the air between them. The man watched her, his gaze unflinching, as if waiting for her to truly understand. The world outside rushed forward, the footsteps of hurried New Yorkers, the hum of honking taxis. But Ivanka felt frozen in time. She wasn't just judging the man, but herself. Her platform allowed her to make a difference. But what difference could she make in a single moment? Tears welled in her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. For a second, She imagined what it must feel like to have no place to call home, no safe haven, no one to truly see you. The man's story, though brief, pierced her heart, a reflection of a reality far removed from her gilded lifestyle. "I wish I could do more," Ivanka whispered, her voice breaking, "but I don't know how." The man stepped closer, his voice gentle yet firm. "You don't need to do more, you just need to care." His words lingered in the air, a truth that struck deeper than any accusation or pity. Ivanka's breath hitched as she realized that caring wasn't always about grand gestures. It was often about small, meaningful moments. The crowd had faded into the background once more, and in this intimate exchange, everything felt more real than ever before. Ivanka took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the man in front of her. His words echoed in her mind. "You don't need to do more, you just need to care." It wasn't a simple solution, but it was a truth she couldn't shake. She realized that in moments like these, actions didn't have to be grand. They simply needed to come from a genuine place of understanding. She reached into her purse slowly, pulling out a $5 bill. The man's eyes softened as he extended his hand, accepting it without a word. Yet, before he could walk away, he hesitated, his gaze fixed on hers, searching for something more, something deeper. "This isn't what I asked for," he said quietly, his voice steady yet pointed. "It's not about the money." Ivanka's heart clenched at his words. She had hoped that a simple gesture would be enough to bridge the gap between them, but it wasn't. The man wanted more. He wanted a recognition of his humanity, not just a handout. She felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest, the weight of responsibility and understanding. "You're right," she said softly, her voice carrying the vulnerability she hadn't realized she had been holding back. "It's not enough. But what can I do?" For a moment there was silence. The streets seemed quieter, the world still. The man gazed at her, his expression thoughtful. "Talk to me," he said finally. "Not about solutions or charity. Just talk." The simplicity of his request cut through her like a blade. It wasn't about the fix or the answer. It was about acknowledging the person standing before her. Ivanka felt a wave of emotions rush through her. Anger at the world that let him stand there, sadness for all the unseen struggles, and hope that maybe, just maybe, small changes could begin with small steps. "We'll start with this," Ivanka said, her voice firm but gentle. "A conversation." The man smiled, a genuine, almost relieved smile. "That's all I've ever wanted." And in that moment, the noise of the city returned, louder than before, but Ivanka felt calmer. The decision wasn't just about the dollar or the moment. It was about a deeper understanding, a realization that caring meant more than fleeting generosity. It meant real connection. Ivanka sat in her car after the encounter, her mind racing through every word, every moment. The weight of the man's simple request, just a conversation, still lingered. Her bodyguards were quiet, respectful of her need for solitude, but the silence wasn't enough to ease the thoughts spiraling through her head. "You're a public figure," one of them had said earlier, as if trying to protect her from herself. But she couldn't shake the thought that being seen, being acknowledged, mattered more than just protection. "I've given money before," she whispered to herself, leaning back against the seat. "But that doesn't solve anything." Her voice was filled with frustration, more at the system than at the man. He wasn't asking for a fix, he was asking for something real. The images flashed through her mind. The man's face, his quiet desperation, the raw emotion in his voice. And it hit her, this wasn't about charity. It was about human connection. In a world where status and wealth often defined worth, this encounter had forced her to question everything she believed she knew about making a difference. Her phone buzzed with notifications, news articles, social media debates, people offering both praise and criticism. But none of it felt relevant. What mattered was how she felt inside. Could she walk away from moments like this and still remain the same? Could she ignore the truth hidden beneath the surface? "I need to do something," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the window. Something real. The world outside blurred as her thoughts deepened visions of a foundation. A support system that didn't rely on empty gestures, but real, tangible change. But there was fear, too. Fear of failure, of being misunderstood, of stepping into unknown territory where results weren't guaranteed. Still, the pull was stronger than her doubts. She had to act, not just as Ivanka Trump, the businesswoman or philanthropist, but as a human being who had seen a need that couldn't be ignored. "I'll start small," she resolved, her voice steady. "But I'll start." The following days were filled with reflection and quiet conversations. Ivanka couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the homeless man's face, his words echoing in her thoughts. "Just talk to me." She sat in her office, a stack of reports and schedules in front of her, but none of it held her attention. Her mind kept returning to that moment on the street, to the feeling of helplessness and the sense that more could be done. It wasn't just about one person. There were thousands like him, lost in the same desperate struggle. She opened her laptop, browsing through articles and studies on homelessness across the country. The statistics were overwhelming. Millions without homes, without access to basic services, without anyone to listen. It became clear to her then that conversation wasn't just a starting point. It was the foundation for understanding. Her phone buzzed again. More notifications, more messages. But this time, it wasn't about praise or criticism. It was from her team suggesting ideas for a new initiative. A program focused on advocacy, awareness, and personal connections. Tears pricked her eyes as she read the email. This wasn't just another business decision. It was a step toward real, meaningful change. She began to see how conversations could lead to policy shifts, how human stories could ignite movements, and how something as simple as listening could spark empathy across communities. In that quiet moment of reflection, she realized how easy it was to become numb to the larger issues when surrounded by privilege and power. But it was in the smallest gestures, offering a hand, sharing a conversation, that real transformation began. Her gaze softened as she thought of the man again. His face, his plea. Those moments would stay with her as reminders that caring wasn't enough on its own. It had to be followed by action. And that action, no matter how small, could ripple out in ways she had yet to fully comprehend. "I'll keep listening," she whispered to herself. "And I'll keep acting." The night felt endless, but Ivanka couldn't sleep. The weight of the conversation with the homeless man still lingered, pulling her thoughts into deeper places. She replayed every word, every pause, and the way his gaze had searched hers for something more, something deeper than just a dollar or a gesture. Hours earlier, she had left her office to walk through her city once more. The streets were quieter now, the hum of the day fading into a stillness that felt more reflective. She passed the same street corner where their interaction had unfolded. The man wasn't there, but his absence made the memory sharper. "I've thought about your words," she said aloud to herself, the cold air pressing against her skin. "What can I do for you that truly matters?" It wasn't a question she had answers for right away, but it was the question that kept coming back, over and over again, like a gentle reminder that action needed to be intentional, purposeful, and meaningful. She couldn't provide temporary solutions or surface-level fixes. She needed to understand how real, lasting change began. Ivanka sat on a nearby bench, her fingers tracing patterns in the frost that had formed overnight. Her mind wandered to countless stories she had heard from other communities. Marginalized, forgotten, neglected. Each one carried a unique story of pain, but at its core was a yearning for recognition, understanding, and inclusion. "It starts with this," she thought. One question, one moment of human connection. Her own privilege couldn't erase those disparities, but it could guide her to act in a way that mattered, not just to serve but to empower. In the quiet of the night, Ivanka felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was a challenge, yes, a daunting one, but it was also an opportunity to transform the lives of those who had been cast aside for too long. The path wouldn't be easy, and there would be mistakes along the way, but that single question kept her grounded. What can I do for you that truly matters? The answer lay within the stories she would continue to hear, in the connections she would continue to make, each one guiding her toward a deeper understanding of what true impact meant. The morning sun rose slowly over the city, casting a warm glow on the streets Ivanka had walked the night before. She couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation she had with the homeless man had sparked something inside her. A desire to truly understand what change looked like, beyond superficial acts of charity. Her phone buzzed again with messages, but this time they weren't about status or business deals. They were emails from people offering to collaborate on initiatives focused on community outreach, mental health support, and education for the homeless. It was overwhelming yet reassuring. "I can't do this alone," she thought, staring out the window. The weight of the responsibility sat heavily, but it was no longer suffocating, it was motivating. Ivanka knew that change didn't come from grand speeches or media coverage. It came from the people willing to listen, to act, and to stand alongside those in need. Her mind drifted back to the man's final words. "It starts with listening." It wasn't just a platitude. It was the truth that would guide her. Steps forward. Listening was the foundation on which all meaningful action must be built. "So, what do I do now?" she asked aloud, pacing the room as her thoughts raced. There were endless paths she could take, endless programs to create. But the answer wasn't in complexity, it was in simplicity. Simple steps, real connections, genuine empathy. Ivanka recalled her conversation from the night before, how the man's eyes held a depth of suffering and hope that couldn't be ignored. She understood now that it wasn't about offering solutions first. It was about being present, truly present. "I will start small," she decided, her voice steady and firm. "But I will start." Her foundation wasn't built on grand promises. It was built on the weight of each conversation, each connection, and the slow, deliberate process of understanding. The city outside hummed with life, but Ivanka felt more grounded than ever. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had taken the first step. A step that began with listening and would continue toward creating lasting change. Days passed, and Ivanka's commitment deepened. She met with community leaders, activists, and those who had first-hand experience with homelessness. Each conversation reinforced the importance of empathy, of seeing beyond the surface and understanding the complexities that shape people's lives. The more she listened, the more she realized how deeply interconnected the issues were. Mental health, poverty, lack of education, and social exclusion. Solutions couldn't be piecemeal. They had to address the root causes. And it all began with simple, authentic connections. Her initial vision began to take form. A platform for dialogue. A space where voices could be heard. Where stories could be shared beyond the headlines. It wasn't about policy alone. It was about fostering a community that understood, supported, and uplifted one another. Yet, with every step forward, self-doubt crept in. Could her foundation truly make a lasting difference? Were the resources she had enough to bring meaningful change? She thought back to the man she had met on the street, the simplicity of his request. "Just talk to me." "I'm talking," she reminded herself, as if reassuring the whispering doubts. Now it's time to act. The streets were still busy, still loud, but Ivanka felt a new sense of clarity. Her foundation began hosting community events, workshops, and mentorship programs. Small groups gathered, sharing experiences and ideas, each conversation a thread in the larger tapestry of change. "We are building bridges," she said aloud one evening, the phrase resonating in her mind. Bridges of understanding, of compassion, of unity. Every step was a foundation for something more substantial, something that couldn't be measured by dollars or fame alone. The man's words echoed once more. It starts with listening. And she knew, as long as they kept listening, as long as they kept connecting, those bridges would grow stronger, deeper, and more meaningful. The foundation was flourishing. What began as a simple initiative had grown into a movement, one conversation at a time. Ivanka watched as communities came together, sharing stories, offering support, and learning from one another. The ripple effect had surpassed her expectations. Every small action was sparking change, building momentum. Each event, each discussion, deepened her understanding of the issues at hand. People who once felt invisible were now seen, heard, and valued. It wasn't just about offering resources, it was about fostering a sense of belonging, of empowerment. Every voice mattered, Every story added to the collective strength of the movement. The man from the street corner never returned, but Ivanka often wondered where he might be, how he was doing. She realized that even if some individual stories weren't immediately resolved, they were part of a larger effort, an ongoing journey of connection and compassion. "You were right," she said softly one evening to herself. "It starts with listening." The Foundation's mission was clear: to continue building bridges, not just within communities, but between them. The more people engaged, the more stories were shared, the more barriers fell. It was a slow process, but a meaningful one. A process that required patience, persistence, and a deep commitment to genuine change. As the foundation grew, Ivanka knew the work wasn't over. Every day, new challenges arose, new voices needed to be heard. Yet, with each challenge, there was an opportunity for growth, for deeper understanding, and for stronger connections. "I believe in this," she said, her voice resolute, "and I won't stop." Her message was clear. This wasn't just about her. This was about everyone who joined the cause, everyone who contributed in their own way. Together, they were building something that couldn't be undone. A legacy of compassion, advocacy, and hope. Join the movement. Listen. Together we create change.